Hi, thanks for joining us today. I'm Lou with the Houston Camera Exchange, and I'd like to talk just a little bit about camera basics today. Just your basic, get started to shoot right away kind of information. So I've got two different types of cameras here in front of me today. I was gonna kind of talk a little bit about both film and digital because the truth is the basics are the same. There's not a lot that's gonna change between the two. The only thing that really changes is how you're recording the image you're taking. I just wanted to show sort of how these mirrored type of cameras sort of work, just so you get a better understanding of what the basics behind them is. You have a mirror, the light from the lens is gonna come in, bounce off that mirror, and then you're gonna be able to look through this viewfinder at the back, and it's gonna look exactly like you're looking through a window. A lot of people really do like this. It's very nostalgic feeling. It makes you feel like you're one with your camera. It feels like you're looking and seeing exactly what your camera is seeing. This is your basic lens. All lenses work in pretty much the same way. Some have autofocus, some don't. Some have bigger apertures, some have smaller ones. There's certainly variability, but they all basically work the same. So you'll have just a couple of elements within the lens, a rear and a front and some in between. That's gonna direct your light through the lens and to your camera. And then inside of it, so there's an aperture inside. This is gonna open and close just like the iris in your eye. This is gonna control how much light comes in through the lens at any given moment so that you can have more or less hitting your film or sensor at a time. This also controls how much is in focus from front to back. So let's say you have a 1.8 f-stop. That's gonna be pretty much all the way open. So you're gonna get a ton of light in really fast, but that means you're gonna have very little in focus from front to back. You're gonna pick a pinpoint like somebody's eye, somebody's face, writing on a box. Everything else around that's gonna be blurred out. It's gonna look really pretty, really isolate your subject. Make sure that that subject is the only thing you're noticing in your frame. The other types of cameras that you'll see are gonna be digital cameras. Some of them are gonna have a mirror just like this and work the same exact way. Some of them aren't. Some of them, when you take that lens cap off, you're gonna see that sensor right there. That is your main imaging component. It's very delicate, but it's also the magic. Lenses will work the same way for this, and that's pretty much how a camera is gonna record an image. For this, you would use film, and it just records straight on the emulsion. So I just wanted to talk about the basics of how we control exposure. That really is the fundamentals of how to take an image. There are gonna be three things that you're gonna balance to get a correct exposure. And depending on how you balance those will change things like whether or not your subject is in focus, whether you're recording movement or stopping action, things like that. So let's start with the basics. First, ISO, or film speed. This is true for both film and digital cameras. It means the same, it does the same, it pretty much acts the same. Digital cameras sometimes are a little more sensitive, but don't worry too much about that. So when you buy a roll of film, you're gonna notice a little number on the box. That number tells you how sensitive it is to light. It's the same thing in a digital camera. You'll be able to find a button or somewhere in the menu system, you'll have a title set that says ISO. When you click that, you're gonna see very similar numbers than you might have seen on film. Anywhere from 100 all the way up to 12,800, or even higher in some cases. But all that number really means is how sensitive your sensor is to light, just like with film. So the higher that number, the more sensitive it is to light, the faster it's gonna record light. So it's better in lower light situations like this Delta 3200, which is a wonderful black and white film. It's great for shooting sports, great for really low light situations where you might not be able to use a tripod. So same thing inside of a digital camera. You'll find that in your camera. On this Nikon, for instance, it's got a little ISO button right up here at the top. You would hit that, go through your menu system, and pick the ISO that makes the most sense for your situation. The next balancing method is going back to that f-stop. So that ring that is on your lens, sometimes you'll do it from the camera as well, like on digital cameras, you'll usually have some kind of wheel that'll control this on the camera. The aperture is the name of the mechanical device that opens and closes inside of a lens. The f-stop is the measurement of that opening. The other thing you'll notice on most digital cameras, on most automatic cameras, is 4 little letters. And we always say, get out of auto. Well, that's what this class is here to teach you how to do. Once you are out of auto, you have P, which is basically auto. Don't use it, it doesn't count as getting out of auto. S, or TV on Canons, A, or AV on Canons, and M, which stands for manual. In these modes, you are going to have control over those 3 aspects. You're going to have control over your aperture, your ISO, and your shutter speed. When it comes to aperture, a lot of people like using this A on their camera. This allows you to control just that aperture. So let's say you're doing someone's portrait. You are going to want just them in focus, like I was talking about a little bit earlier, where your subject is nice and crystal clear, but everything going on around them is not. It's blurred out. It's not part of your subject matter. To be able to do that, you would put it in A and control that aperture, control your f-stop. They really mean the same thing. Think of it like a fraction. 1 over 1.8 is a larger fraction than 1 over 22. So it's gonna let more light in. So the smaller that number is, more light is coming in because it's a fraction. Let's say you were taking a portrait, going back to a portrait. If you're in aperture priority, you can control that aperture. So you can say, okay, well, I want pretty much nothing but their eyeball in focus. I want the skin to look really, really soft. I want pores to be completely blurred out. I want just the eyeball in focus. So you would put it at 1.8 or 1.4 and make sure that you focus just on that eyeball. Otherwise, you're gonna have a blurry looking photo. It's gonna be extremely shallow. A little bit easier, shoot at 3.5, shoot at f4. You'll get a good amount of blur, but not a ton, but you'll be able to keep your full subject in focus. So play with that. Play with how much is in focus from front to back, because that is the main thing that aperture is controlling. The next letter is going to be your S, or TV on Canons. What that means is time variable, or shutter priority. Here, you're going to control that shutter speed. Shutter speed is the other major component to controlling how much light is coming in, but it also controls how much movement you're going to show, whether or not you're stopping action. So the faster your subject is, if you're trying to stop its action, the faster that shutter speed needs to be. Again, same on both film and digital, so I'll just show you real quick kind of the difference between that. On this camera, I can, go anywhere from half a second or a second. This is gonna be half a second. And that mirror is gonna pop up and then drop back down. That's my shutter opening and closing. Just make it a little bit faster, give you an idea of how much faster it can move. This is 1,000th of a second. You're not even gonna see it. Super fast. So with that, you can control things like water movement. Let's say you're doing one of those really cool landscape photos where the water looks nice and smooth and creamy. That's done with a really slow shutter speed. So you put your camera on a tripod, slow that shutter speed down as far as you can, let's say a few seconds if you can, and that's gonna show the movement of that water running. The opposite of that would be somebody perhaps is playing football or baseball, and you want to stop their action as they're running or swinging the bat. That's going to require really high shutter speed, 1,000th of a second or faster. So balancing your shutter speed can really control how the end result of the image is going to look, whether or not there's motion blur on purpose or not. Once you have mastered or gotten familiar with the effects that both shutter speed and aperture have on an image, that's when it's time to actually go into full manual, once you're really comfortable. In full manual, you have control over both of those aspects together. This is when you want absolute full control. For me, I use this mostly when I am shooting macro. If I'm shooting macro photography, I have a very specific amount of subject that I want in focus. Sometimes that subject is moving, sometimes it's not. Sometimes I want to show its motion blur, sometimes I don't. So for me, that's the biggest place that I use manual, where I want absolute control over both of those aspects of the image. But it is all a balancing act, so keep that in mind. The more your aperture is open, in other words, the bigger your f-stop is, and the more light is coming in, that is going to require the camera to have a higher shutter speed to get appropriate exposure. So to do that, sometimes you'll use things like filters, ND filters or circular polarizers, something that darkens the image a little bit. Obviously, it can get very complicated from there, so please check out other videos as they come out. We'll be going over all kinds of things to get people a little more comfortable using their camera. But for camera basics, that's basically it. It's all a balancing game of shutter speed, ISO, and your aperture, and understanding how those three things really affect the image and how they can all work together. So thanks for tuning in. I'm really glad y'all joined us today. Please keep checking us out for more videos to come.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and come visit us at the Houston Camera Exchange, 5900 Richmond Avenue.